The Lord be with you. A reading from the Gospel according to Mark. He summoned a crowd with his disciples and said to them, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. What profit is there for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? What could one give in exchange for his life?" The gospel inspired by God. There are dreams, and then there are weird dreams, and then there are really weird dreams. I had a really weird dream on Tuesday last. The night before, I was watching a documentary on human cloning, which is actually beginning to happen. And so I have this really, really weird dream. So bear with me, it's really out of left field. So in my dream, I'm watching this character, a mad scientist called Big Lou. And he's a geneticist. And he's in his laboratory, and he figures he wants to live forever. So he sends out an advertisement. He's a very well-known surgeon and geneticist. He sends out an advertisement looking for 10 women who want to become pregnant, have babies of their own, but don't want to be married or have the problems of partnership. And so he guarantees he can take their eggs, fertilize the eggs. He's going to get the ideal donor for each one of them. He won't tell them who the donor is, but he guarantees them he'll do a genetic test in them, and he'll get the ideal donor and fertilize the eggs for them. So over the next 10 months, one a month, women appear from all over the United States. And he takes them in, and he harvests an egg. And then he goes into the egg, and he extracts the DNA from the egg. So now basically the egg is just potting soil. There's no DNA of the mother left in. She doesn't know that. And then he implants his own DNA into the egg, fertilizes it, reimplants it in the woman's womb. And she goes back, she carries her baby, she thinks it's her baby, that's her egg, and gives birth to a healthy little boy. And over the next 10 months, he does this for 10 different women. And he said, the names he has for these kids, he's calling them Little Lou 1, Little Lou 2, Little Lou 3, down to Little Lou 10. And he's keeping tabs on them. And he's got an agreement with each of these women that he has the right to visit these kids on a regular basis just to check up and see how they're doing. And she thinks it's for medical purposes. And so he maintains this relationship with them. And he's keeping an eye on these kids as they're growing up. Now, 22 years passes, and at this stage, Big Lou is in his 80s, and his body is breaking down. So he figures out he wants to do a full body transplant. So he visits these 10 kids who are now in their 20s, and he looks at them, and he figures out that little Lou number 3 is the ideal candidate. He's in really, really, really good physical shape, and he figures out that's the body I want. And so he abducts little Lou number 3, and he kills him. And he extracts the brain and throws it away. Takes the body back to his own laboratory, and he's created this beautiful, huge computer that can do surgery, absolute brilliant surgery. And he has this machine transplant his brain into little Lou 3's body, and then he discards Big Lou's body, and now he calls himself New Lou. He feels really, really good, and he looks really, really great. He looks like he's 26. Unfortunately, the family of little Lou 3 figure out that little Lou 3 is missing, and they go looking for him. And they can't find him, but they find the brain. And they do a DNA test, and they find out it's little Lou. So they contact the police. And meanwhile, somebody else has found Big Lou's discarded body, and they report it to the police. And now the police are looking for, somebody who committed a double homicide. And somehow they figure out New Lou is the guy. So New Lou is arrested, and he's on trial. And he has this extraordinary attorney, a really brilliant, brilliant attorney. And the attorney takes DNA from little Lou 3's brain, and from Big Lou's abandoned body, and from New Lou, and he shows that they're identical. And he forces the jury to conclude that instead of being accused of double homicide, he can only be accused of a double suicide. And he's left off, and they all live happily ever after. That's all in a dream last Tuesday. Eh? A real true dream last Tuesday. Cookies, Margie. So I want to jump off from that place this morning. It's a weird dream, but it led me to think about stuff quite deeply. So I'm just going to make 2 points this morning. And the first point I'm going to ask is, when you say me, what do you mean when you say me? And the second point I want to make is I want to look at the origin and the kind of the lifespan of the ego. Okay, so let's look at the first question. When you say me, who are you talking about? Firstly, is this dream I had, is it technically possible? And it is. It's technically possible. And so, at some stage, if we live long enough, we'll see the results of this and the ethical issues involved in it. So it is technically possible. We can begin to do these kinds of things. The question is, when little Lou said me, and when big Lou said me, and when new Lou said me, was it the same me they were pointing to? Because they were genetically identical. They were absolute clones of each other. So what differentiated them? Were they all pointing to the same essence when they said me? So what defines me? So obviously, it can't be our physical bodies. We cannot be our physical bodies. And on a monthly basis, every single skin cell in your body is shed. Half of the dust in your home is dead skin cells. So you're shedding your skin once a month, every single skin cell in your body. In the course of 6 weeks, every cell in your stomach lining is changed out. On a 6-month basis, every single cell in your skeletal system is changed out. And in a 7-year cycle, every cell in your body is changed out. So you can't point to yourself and say, that's me. If you look at a photograph of yourself taken 8 years ago, there's not a single cell in your body now that was there then. So your body can't be you. So is it your emotions that define who you are? Your emotions are like a roller coaster. You can be happy and sad and anxious and depressed and joyful all in the course of one day. So your emotions can't define you. You can have emotions, but they don't define you. So is it your thinking? Is it your ideas that define who you are? You can change your thinking from day to day. You read a really good book, you find a great teacher, and you change your thinking radically. So what defines you? Is it your memory bank? Is it the whole bunch of memories you've strung together from all the experiences you've had, and you point to that archives and say, that's who I am? So how do you actually define yourself? And if you start downloading somebody's brain, if you could somehow translate the electrical circuitry and the firing of neurons and download them, would you be downloading the essence of the person or merely just electrical correlates for the experiences they had? So we have to differentiate, I think, then very strongly between what I call the spirit and the space suit. The space suit has particular kinds of artifacts. There's physicality attached to it, there's emotionality, there's intellectuality, and there's personality. But even the personality does not define you. Personality is simply the interface between your essence and the environment in which the essence finds itself. So you put the same soul in a different environment, and a different interface will have to emerge. So a different personality will have to emerge. So typically, psychology thinks that personality is an artifact between nature and nurture, or between genetics and environment. They're two factors, but they're not the most important factors as far as I'm concerned. The single most important factor in the makeup of a personality is the soul that comes in and its previous history. So your personality, as it emerges, is the sum total of all of the other lifetimes and experiences you ever had, now merging with a new spacesuit in a new environment with a new set of genetic material, and that interface now becomes your current personality that you will take with you throughout your life. So I'm going to use the example of, can the brain even hold all the experiences you've had? And the answer is a resounding no. It cannot. Your physical brain cannot even hold all of the memories you've generated and all of the experiences you've ever had. So I want to use the example of, many of you probably have a Kindle or an iPad. I've got a Kindle that I use for reading. Most of my reading now I do on a Kindle. And I realize that I've downloaded hundreds of books over the last several years. But the capacity of the Kindle isn't big enough to hold that material. So it has to offload it to the cloud. So if I want to recall an old book that I read 2 or 3 years ago, I have to download it again from the cloud onto my device. The device itself can only hold a certain number of books. And so I have to access the cloud to download even previous stuff I'd already read and that I technically own. Now, the human brain is a little bit like that. The human brain is not big enough to hold anything like all of the memories and all of the experiences you've generated, even in this one lifetime. So they're offloaded someplace onto the cloud. So what do we mean by the cloud? For me, the cloud is what Hinduism would call the Akashic Records. That we offload our experiences constantly and our memories, and we can access it. The brain is a device that can access it and bring it down, into current usage. Just like your Kindle can access the cloud and take back an old book so that you can read it right now. That's the function of the brain. But the brain is not anywhere big enough to store all of the experiences you've had, not even in this one lifetime. And certainly, it cannot store all of the experiences you've had in all of the lifetimes you've lived, in all of the dimensions in which you've lived, in all of the planets in which you've lived, in all of the life forms in which you've lived. There's no way that your physical brain can do that. It's just an accessing technique that allows you contact with the Akashic Records. Now, I believe that there are kind of two aspects to the Akashic Records. It's not just that every single one of us has access to all of the experiences that we've had as a soul from incarnation to incarnation to incarnation, but that every single one of us can also access the experiences that other souls have had. And use a different kind of an example. It's as if you took a bunch of photographs and you uploaded them onto your Facebook page and you send it out to the world. Anybody who has access to your Facebook page can download those photographs. So they are privy to experiences that you've had. So not only have we access to our own lineage of experiences through the soul from incarnation to incarnation, but if we know how to do it, we can also access the learnings and the experiences of everybody else. And the reason is we're all part of the body of God. And so God is the one who's having all these experiences through manifest created beings. So every created being is generating experiences which, in some senses, the immanence of God is having. And just like if you eat an apple, the parts of your body that weren't involved in getting the apple, the eye that saw the apple, and the legs that took you forward, and the hand that grabbed it, and the teeth that chewed on it, they're not the only parts of your body that benefit from your eating the apple. Everything in your body benefits from the eating of the apple. Once it's transferred through metabolism into energy, every single organ in the body, every single cell of the body benefits from the apple that the eye saw, the legs walked to, the hand grabbed, and the teeth chewed upon. And so any experiences that any child of God is having is available to the body of Christ. And if we know how to access that place, we can learn from all these different places. And for me, that is the real teaching of the Jesus Christ and the Buddha figures. When you see me, Philip, you see the Father. If you really see to the core of any one person, you're seeing the God within, and therefore you're seeing God, and therefore all experiences are possible for you. This is the first point I want to make. So when you say me, then who are you really talking about? You can't just point to a physical body. You can't even point to even your own personal experiences. There's something much, much bigger when you really point to the me. So I want to look then at how we kind of reduce this, the second point. What is the origin and the kind of the lifespan of the ego? So every soul comes into a new incarnation totally expecting to find a loving mother figure who will answer all of its needs. And it is necessary that the little newborn infant be a total narcissist. It is important that a child become a total narcissist. They only understand self. And everything they do is predicated upon the nourishment and the survival of the self, of the core self. So we all start off absolute narcissists, and that's important. We have to grow beyond that, but it's important that we begin there. Now, part of the understanding of the child, and obviously this is not a conscious understanding, this is deeply embedded in the unconscious of the child, is that there's only one organism here, the mother-child complex. And I'm in charge of it. I shout and a breast appears. I'm cold, somebody cuddles me. I'm afraid, somebody hugs me. And so I call the shots. But then somewhere around the age of 6 or 7 or 8 months, the little infant begins to realize the horrible truth that we're not just one organism and I'm not in charge of it. We're two distinct organisms and all the power seems to reside in the other piece of it. So I now realize that I'm just like a caboose attached to an engine. And now the engine has gone off down the tracks and I'm abandoned here for myself. At this stage, the ego begins to constellate. That's the origin of the ego. It is to deal with the horrible realization that we are not one and I am not in charge. And so at this stage, we develop all kinds of defense mechanisms to try to woo mother back into relationship. So sometimes I'll be cute and cuddly, sometimes I'll scream my head off, sometimes I'll act out. We all develop our own ways of trying to bring mommy back into the equation so she will love me. At that stage, it seems to me that the little baby is operating out of just two basic principles. We're born with the ability to feel love, and we're born with the ability to feel fear. And when love is self-directed, it becomes self-esteem. And when love is other-directed, it becomes compassion. And when fear is self-directed, it becomes depression. And when fear is other-directed, it becomes anger. And then these four pieces combine and permute. And every single virtue is literally just love in some kind of disguise. You know, in some instances, love looks like resilience. In other circumstances, it looks like compassion. Other circumstances, it looks like a sense of humor. Other circumstances, it looks like patience. Other circumstances, it looks like forgiveness. But they're all love in disguise. And all vices are forms of fear. Sometimes it comes out, it looks like anxiety. Sometimes it looks like depression. Sometimes like anger. Sometimes like rage. Sometimes like, inability to forgive. It comes out in different guises, but it's basically, fear. And the greatest fear of all in the little infant is the fear of being unlovable. Not just even being unloved, because to be unloved means it could change, but to be unlovable means it can never change. That's the deepest, deepest fear in the little infant. And that's the origin. That's what jump-starts the ego into being. And it's important. Otherwise, the little child would not survive psychologically, the first year of life. So the ego then, the function of the ego at that stage, is to try to manage this horrible realization, to keep the defense mechanisms in balance so we can attempt some kinds of meaningful relationships and to make our way in the world. So it becomes really, really important. The problem is the ego is very good as long as it's a servant to the self. It's terrible when it appears to be the master of the self. And these many of the parables of Jesus Christ are actually addressing this. You have to unpack them in order to understand them. When Christ says something like, the kingdom of God is like a rich man who decided to go on a journey and he put a steward in charge of all his property. And the rich man was away for a long time and the steward began to abuse all of the other servants and to act as if he owned the house. What's going to happen when the rich man comes back? Now, who is the rich man? We think it's God and that God is going to punish the sinners. It has nothing got to do with God. It's the story between the rich man is the soul and the steward is the ego. The ego is given responsibility for marshalling the state of waking consciousness, but it acts as if it actually owns the household, and it doesn't. That's the property of the soul. So again and again and again, Christ will talk about these kinds of things. So the ego is really important as long as it doesn't regard itself as being the master of the household. And so this great Indian guru at one stage will say, all human suffering lies in the tiny gap between the ego and the self, between the ego and the soul. It is the ego's belief system that it is in charge that creates all human suffering. When I can really point to the real me and I realize the real me is not the ego, then I let go of a lot of human suffering. So the question then rises, does the ego reincarnate? When the soul moves from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, does the ego reincarnate? And the answer is a resounding no. The ego does not reincarnate. I want to use an example. Imagine you are an adventurer who loves every year to take your summer vacation and to travel to some exotic places, different countries, places you don't even speak the languages. But you've learned over the years that there's a way of doing this really, really well. So when you get to a place, you appoint a tour guide. You make friends with a tour guide who's going to lead you through the areas. He speaks the local language. He's your taxi driver, and he takes total control over what you're going to see. And you trust ultimately that this person is going to show you the sights and explain their significance to you. Now, at the end of the vacation, you don't attempt to bring your tour guide back to the States with you, because next year you're going to be going to a totally different location. It'll be a different language, a different tour guide, and a different taxi driver. And this person will be ideally situated to show you the sights in this new place. That's what it's like to move from lifetime to lifetime. What happens is, most of us, we go to a place, we appoint a tour guide. The tour guide does a really, really good job. We fall in love with the tour guide and we don't want to come home. So we think we are the ego. We fall in love with the tour guide. The tour guide is simply the ego, appointed for a particular safari in order to show us, because the ego knows the language of incarnation. But we are not the taxi driver and we are not the tour guide. It becomes really, really important at the end of your vacation, you have to thank profoundly the taxi driver and the tour guide for helping you understand this new location, and then go back home. At the end of a lifetime, we have to say thank you to the ego for showing us the possibilities inherent in incarnation, and then let go. So I'd end with one of the statements in today's gospel, where Jesus said, you must take up your cross and follow me. The one who would deny his life will save it, and the one who would save his life will lose it. He's talking about ego and soul here. That the person who's identified, with the ego is going to lose everything. But the person who's identified with the soul also has a great relationship with the ego. So if you know you are as your soul, your ego is really, really good for you. If you think you're your ego is really, really bad for you. So the symbol of the cross for me is not an instrument of torture that, on which Christ died. That's parenthetical to the exercise. For me, the real symbolism of the cross is that the horizontal arm of the cross is the connection between all living things. It is my connection with all of my sisters and brothers, whether they're in human form or in flora or fauna, whatever they are. That's the horizontal arm of the cross. And the vertical arm of the cross is the connection between the immanence of God, God as created beings, and the transcendence of God, the ineffable mystery of Source. And where the two of them intersect, that is the self. You are the intersection point between all of the lateral relationships among created beings and the connection between God as transcendence with God as immanence. And in that sense, the journey of incarnation is a beautiful journey. It's a journey of a cross, but not a cross of crucifixion. It's a cross of resurrection.